Welcome back to Anime Lockdown. I am happy to introduce to you Dry Bones of the Skeleton Crew with Can't Even Think Straight, the 2021 Extra Gay Edition. Welcome to Anime Lockdown.
Hey everyone! Again, this is Can't Even Think Straight, representing and misrepresenting LGBTQIA characters in anime and manga, the 2021 Extra Gay Edition. I'm Dry Bones of the Skeleton Crew. I use she, her pronouns. Before we get started, I'd like it if you would all help me bless the stream with an energetic, love-filled cry of trans rights in the chats on the count of three, okay? 1, 2, 3. Trans rights! Thanks, friends! So this is a panel covering media properties from Japan, and since I imagine most of us here today are not from Japan, I wanted to take a moment to talk about cultural lenses. Since Japan is a country with its own culture and history that isn't necessarily reflected in how we do... Oh, that is not what I want. How we do or perceive... Can you get rid of that, please? Zach, can you get rid of the notifications? Sorry. Since Japan is a country with its own culture and history that isn't necessarily reflected in how we do or perceive things in North America, specifically when it comes to experiences of sexuality or gender especially, the historical differences between us form different frames of reference. So I wanted to talk about the cultural concepts of moso, which translates to wild ideas, and nonai henkan, which means to transform inside your brain. What they mean is what a Japanese audience might see as an opportunity to get what they personally desire out of a story. Many Westerners might not feel is clear or explicit enough, or may read it as baiting. One example I can provide is the kiss scene from the 7th episode of Beauty on Ice, and it's debatably an explicit depiction. The writer of Yuri on Ice, Kubo Mitsuro, spoke in some interviews about how only Western audience members came to ask her to verify that this was indeed intended to depict a kiss, whereas Japanese fans didn't seem to need her clarification. Meanwhile, if you were around on the English-speaking queer anime fan internet at the time, you'll likely remember seeing spicy posts like this one online, particularly on Tumblr. Because apparently we needed an artist's explicit rendition in order to believe that two faces smashed into each other were actually kissing and not, I don't know, whispering heterosexual secrets into each other's mouths. It is worth noting that another interpretation of moso is delusions, and that the basic concept of nonai henkan admits that you are making a transformation from the text. I want to acknowledge that I am approaching this conversation mostly with a Western analysis. And Japan is not a magical country that's free of the same sort of homophobia that we experience in the rest of the world. Japanese creators and consumers might always be looking for the same signals to signify queerness. Not every show has to be like...
Making copies, move, I'm gay.
In the workplace, being gay just has its perks.
Though I do definitely appreciate it when they are. Being able to so explicit and loudly speak about yourself is an enormous privilege, and one that many of us today are still struggling to get a hold on and keep. You're going to hear me occasionally talk about things being good or bad a little bit, but honestly, my main prerogative in this panel is to explore the cultural implications of different content. But I get that it can be complicated and sometimes really difficult to pick out which shows might be doing a better or worse job. So I wanted to give you some tools to discern what is the difference between good and bad representation of queer characters. By my count, there are about 3 categories to meet for good representation. That is, the character not being baited, not being fetishized, and being humanized. There's a little bit of confusion around the topic of bait sometimes. Bait is when creators seem to gently imply queerness upon a character without actually meaning it. Sometimes it's the more obvious no homo moment. Sometimes it's something more subtle, like being presented with scraps intended to suggest potential queerness without actually including earnest queer content. In doing this, the creators are trying to have it both ways without actually giving folks looking for queer content anything substantial. I want to take a moment to touch quickly on a related topic, and that's coding. Coding is when a character reads similarly to a real queer person's lived experience in action, a struggle, words, a set of emotions, or an aesthetic. Coding is different from baiting in that baiting happens in the relationship between the creators and the media, whereas coding plays out in the relationship the consumer has with a piece of media. Unlike baiting, there's no cynical intention from the creators. Coding is simply the inclusion of symbols which point toward a queer identity without making a display of announcing it directly. Because of its casual nature, coding can sometimes be really validating for queer viewers. And if it's not been necessary for you to ever have used your tools of analysis in order to see yourself represented, it becomes very easy to dismiss these subtle implications as meaningless. If that's your experience, though, please keep in mind this is not a universal experience for the entire alphabet mafia. And listen, let's be real. Straight people tell us they're straight in indirect ways all of the time. Just ask any queer person who isn't out to everyone they know. Just ask your ace friend what it's like to be in a group full of allosexual people. Sexuality is a mundane and constant part of culture. And I feel that if you create this higher bar for queer characters, when they have to explicitly say it in words, I love you, in the genital touching kind of way, or actually follow through with that love uninstructed and on screen in order to count, or if they have to clearly enunciate the word transgender to identify themselves and nothing else will do, then you're conceding that we actually are so unusual, rare, and abnormal as to require special and concise labeling. You're recentering cisgender heterosexuality as normative and default, and any sort of queerness is as deviant. And I won't stand for that. Lil Nas X did not slide down a pole to overthrow the devil for you to do that. This only serves to push much of our community back in closets and make homophobes and transphobes more comfortable. And again, me and Lil Nas X will not stand for that. Okay, so in terms of fetishization, how many of you have played a Pokemon game? Probably most of the people listening, right? How many of you are a pocket monster? Content and audience are different things, which is to say, Yuri, for example, is not necessarily lesbian media. Sometimes in media with queer characters, the queerness is presented in such a way as to be exclusionary of an actual queer audience. When this happens, the gaze through which a piece of media is conferred is that of an outsider, a non-queer person. This is what I mean by fetishization. In the case of queer characters, this sometimes, but not always, has a sexual connotation. The queer characters exist as performance for consumption. They are present for a straight audience's viewing pleasure. While this isn't always about sexual content, I do want to note there is a difference between sexual and sexualized that lies in the treatment of the characters, mostly with regards to whether they get to be anything else or not. So, like, are they just really sexy? Is the character just really, really gay and nothing else? I'm fine with it if you want to be horn on main for a cartoon character, real recognize real. I'm more concerned about whether you can otherwise visualize them as a person or not. Which brings us to being humanized. A humanized character is one that is written in a way that could believably be a real person. They're complex and layered and written thoughtfully. They avoid stereotyping. They're also hopefully pretty minimal on tropes. They don't have to be perfect angels. You just need to avoid playing into caricature. I'm fine with queer characters sometimes being bad people. In fact, I think only making queers paragons of virtue is also a problem. It's just when stories are written such that the tropes start to become interchangeable with these identities that you run into trouble. When the creator highlights both a negative characteristic and the queer character's queerness at the same time, that's when things begin to get problematic. So now that I've laid that groundwork, strap in, because I'm here to give the gays everything they want. Well, within the constraints set upon me. This tweet from @Noizomi_ reads, me picking up edible LGBT content out of the garbage and dirt. Oh man, sometimes there's actual food in here. Fandom, please. Kicking my dinner out of my hands. It is more ethical to starve because it's not pure, perfect, whole, holy, 100% kosher content. Morally better to die instead. This is extremely real, and while I'm mostly discussing pretty widely loved properties today, please know that I'm not against brushing a little dirt off some trash. If that's you too, know I stand in solidarity to you, because I am so gay for homosexuality. So, the first one I want to talk about is Bloom Into You, which is a high school Yuri story about members of student council focusing on trauma, recovery, and sexuality. When this manga started coming out, I was simultaneously overjoyed and also deeply troubled by how excited I was to read a manga with multiple asexual and aromantic characters. It really put into relief for me how rare ace and aro representation still is. We live in a world where the dominant culture is a sexual one, so much like how many young lesbian, gay, and pan plus people might start off assuming that they're straight, protagonist Yu starts off assuming that she's allosexual and waiting for her sexuality to kick in, struggling to recognize her identity and trying to make herself be allosexual. Getting into spoiler territory, though, this is a Yuri series, so Yu does eventually develop feelings toward Toko in the later chapters of the manga. But this is also a somewhat common experience among asexual spectrum people, particularly folks within the gray or demisexual spectrums. Ace identities come on a spectrum, and not everyone who is ace is sex repulsed. Honestly, I personally read Toko as ace as well. Canonically, she's had boys and girls confess to her, but never felt anything for any of them. And it wasn't until you made her feel safe being around her and being herself that she started to feel something toward her. I really love thinking of this story as one of two aces in love. Somehow, though, Toko didn't seem to really understand Yu's feelings in kind, which resulted in some pretty problematic situations sometimes. For example, when she coerced Yu into agreeing to initialize a makeout that she didn't really want after sports day. For me, though, these moments read as less aggressive and pushy in the manga for what it's worth. Toko still absorbs most of the plot and development of the story, for better or for worse. She may act kind of sketchy, but her characterization was handled with a lot of care and affection. Also, Bloom Into You advances the long history of using someone fixing a same-gendered character's tie, signifying queerness, that goes all the way back to Heart of Thomas. For some reason, I don't hear about this trope enough, and I really, really love it. I always get very excited when I see someone do this. But unlike Heart of Thomas, the arc that Toko gets in Bloom Into You makes me have a lot of gay feelings and comparatively little gay angst. It makes me feel kind of sweet and hopeful for the future of our community, you know? Since we're on the topic of feeling like a gay marshmallow, do y'all remember Yuri on Ice? I've heard a lot of criticisms of this show pointing out that it's unrealistic in that there's no homophobia or antagonism, which, I mean, sure, maybe there isn't, but so? Why does queer media always have to be realistic, and specifically realistic in the sense that people are mean to queer folks? I have never heard a single person critiquing the realism of Yuri getting with his international superstar sex symbol idol. Wait, hold up. Does this mean that I really do have a chance with Michelle's honor? Okay, never mind. Forget what I said. Nobody criticized that. As it turns out, this exceptionally accepting vibe was purposeful, because when a person sees themselves or their identities depicted positively, especially aspirationally, it can influence how a viewer sees themselves and their position in the world. As a media consumer, when you only see your life represented in terms of hardship, it can be super alienating. And it becomes nigh impossible to avoid internalizing the message that your identity resigns you to tragedy. This is harmful for dominant, in other words, straight cis audiences too, because it encourages them to frame folks with non-dominant identities as exceptional and fundamentally different, which makes all of our lives less rich in the end. It's almost as if folks are trying to say that they do not believe that our world could ever be anything but persecuting of folks with non-normative sexual or gender identities, and I reject that assumption wholeheartedly. Let queers have nice dreams too. We would deserve to get to have reclamative, anti-oppressive spaces. And I don't know about you, but I feel like the road to the Grand Prix final seems like a pretty good place to start. Next, we have Land of the Lustrous. It's a show about a bunch of non-binary gem people in a post-apocalyptic world, heavily inspired by Pure Land Buddhism. Much of the writing is very resonant for non-binary folks, as there's a huge emphasis put on characters' physicalities dictating their life roles, and the protagonist arc involves them pushing back on these bindings at every opportunity. I'm going to reiterate, the entire main cast is non-binary. They are neither exclusively men nor women. They are, in the parlance of the noted gender theorist Fred Durst, the people what do not give an F. And in addition to that, they're all drawn androgynously. And before I get started on that topic, first I want to make sure everyone's clear on one thing here. Non-binary people don't owe you androgyny. And not presenting androgynously does not invalidate a non-binary person's gender. So please keep that in mind. Typically, when we talk about androgyny, what we mean is gendered presentations that lie within some supposed neutral ground in the middle between masculine and feminine. But that's not really a thing. The gems of Land of the Lustrous aren't neutral in terms of gender presentation. And honestly, I challenge you to describe to me what that would even look like. They share a combination of masculine and feminine coded aesthetics. They all lack mammary tissue but have long, smooth legs. They wear menswear uniforms, and their hips are relatively narrow, but their hairstyles frequently favor longer, more feminine styles. That noticeable featuring of feminine attributes among the masculine really messes people up. We're just so used to masculine being the default that it makes femininity really problematic for some non-binary people. We take active note of it where masculinity, to a certain extent, can be more normative and default, and might not be noted in the same ways. But physical presentation and attributes don't precede a person's gender. Phenotype and sex are separate from gender identity and don't necessarily have a correlation. Meet John Wayne Bobbitt and Angelina Jolie. John Wayne Bobbitt in the early 90s had a piece of his penis removed by his wife as retribution for years of domestic violence and marital rape. That piece was later surgically reattached. Angelina Jolie had her original breast removed to avoid potential health risks. What sex are these people? Neither conform to the very rigid and not at all realistic concept that we culturally measure sex by, and yet I have yet to hear anyone calling either of them into question. Like whiteness, the concept of both gender and physical sex are categories of social constructs, ones which we use to categorize and often oppress one another. But we also have the freedom to personally explore these things. Sex is complicated and has factors. It's not an on-off switch, and much of it is also performative. It's not only gender that is performed. Or bringing it back to anime, what sex are these characters? Based purely on their observable phenotypical physical characteristics. Can you tell me how you might categorize them? One has quite a bit of body hair, particularly in the chest, stomach, arms, and legs, while the other is as smooth as some very well-sculpted butter. Or how about these two? We have one very live and delicately framed human, and another with more guns than the prop department of John Wick 3. Or how about these ones? On one character, we have a chest that's drawn with a virtually straight line, and the other has some pretty voluptuous mammary tissue. What sex are these characters? How do we gender them? Or how about these lovely charmers? A lot of muscle tissue, being small or large in stature, body hair in certain places. These differences aren't anomalies, and they aren't necessarily anchored to any identity in particular. These variations occur within human bodies constantly, and sometimes deliberately, sometimes not, within the same body. Our bodies change and shift with time, age, and experiences. This might not seem like such a big deal to folks with binary identities, but a genderqueer friend of mine who often plays with both masculine and feminine presentations made this post on Facebook a while back because someone correctly referred to them as them in an email. And as you can see, it actually brought them to tears. An email. Please consider my friend the next time you feel awkward and stumble over a singular they. It may feel strange for you at first, but you might be validating someone's experience so fully that you make them cry. And since we're talking about singular they, and we're on Facebook already, I thought I'd share another post from a different friend. This one is a shared post from dictionary.com sharing some information about the long-running history of singular they in English. My friend shared the post, adding the comment, "Here, here." To which somebody's dad replied, "I believe you meant to say, there, there." That dad is me. Or as Twitter user @AnCapIsNotReal contextualized it, "If I had a piece of bread for every gender there is, I could make a sandwich." Astro Lost in Space is a shonen space survival story that just happens to include an intersex character. Each character in the main crew has a specialty skill set, and the crafting character Luca is casually revealed to be intersex 20-something chapters in. And they actually use the word intersex. I mean, they call him intersexual, which is not totally ideal, but they mostly get it right. This does not affect his character or his relationships. When confronted by another character who angrily asks him why he's hidden his intersexness from the crew, he replies that he didn't. He said he was a boy. The records say he was a boy, and he's a boy. Nothing's changed. It's not his fault this other dude didn't know what a gender is. I want to pause to clarify because there's some muddy kind of context here, and I want to be clear. We're talking specifically about the character Luca and about intersex people right now, but I want to make sure they don't cause any confusion. Trans people who, for whatever reason, conceal their gender are valid and good. Trans people who, for whatever reason, don't disclose their trans status to others are valid and good. Neither of these people are liars, and they deserve your respect. There are tons of very good reasons to do things like this, and I'm purely talking right now, again, about the context of the story and the validity of the questioning posed toward Luca right now. Back to your regularly scheduled programming. Oftentimes, people get hung up on things being capital G gay, capital M manga. But this is a sci-fi shonen story about working together through adversity, where one of the characters just happens to be intersex. This sort of casual reveal that a character is not cis in a story that is not about them being not cis is basically unheard of. So this manga was pretty exciting. Luca is under complete control of the information and the narrative surrounding his identity. He talks freely and openly about both his biology and his sexuality and defines them in his own terms. And since we're talking about terms, I just want to let folks know, for those who may not already, humans with sex characteristics that cross categories are called intersex, not hermaphrodites. Because hermaphrodite is a term that we use to describe plant life and is pretty dehumanizing when we use it to describe people. Hermaphrodite is also a term that implies possession of all sex organs, which for the most part is not how intersex humans work. Next we have Dokyusei. It's an opposites attract romance between popular guitarist Hikaru and introverted Rihito who can't even read sheet music. BL and yaoi have this really bad reputation for being kind of a rote string of stereotypes, tropes, incoherent sexualization, and sexual assault. I know if I say like yaoi hands, people like are probably now on Tumblr again. But with Dokyusei, we're given genuine romance between two teenage boys. We're shown their hope and their excitement, their confusion and their insecurities, all while avoiding the typical power structures of BL. Both boys are allowed to blush and to cry without shame. And sure, they sneak in a little PG-13 bandicooting here and there, but this is mostly a story about the feelings between these two. BL has been regarded pretty critically in the past for its fetishization of men loving men. And while it's true that this is a genre very commonly enjoyed by cisgender heterosexual women, I'd like to call attention to the fact that BL fandom is also super rife with queer women. Honestly, I think that a lot of those aspersions that people cast toward it are mostly rooted in misogyny. Folks seem to forget that women are still a minoritized class of people. And I think the reason why BL exists and works is because women as a class are very good at relating to fictionalized men. We're raised this way, we spend our entire lives doing the thing. It's natural and unremarkable for us to do so. I feel like getting especially worked up about the fetishization only when it occurs within a genre, when it gains a reputation for particularly catering to women's interests, seems highly suspect to me. Particularly considering what the rest of anime fandom is often up to. Dokyusei contains one of the healthiest analogies for relationship conflict that I've ever seen. In the movie, Yorihito has a dream where the two boys are bound at the wrist by a yellow ribbon. Hikaru tells him he likes the color, and then they hear others calling Yorihito from the distance. Without hesitation, Hikaru cuts the ribbon, freeing Yorihito to do whatever he needs to do without him. Yorihito then panics, asking Hikaru why he did that. Didn't he just say he liked the color? To which Hikaru explains that they can just tie it back together again later. Isn't that okay? Even if it's not the same, even if it looks different, isn't that interesting too? And it's not like the color will change. This is such a healthy example of being able to grow alongside your partner and allowing them the space to freely be their own person with the ability to grow and change beside you. Hikaru accepts and supports Rihito as an individual who can change, which is one of the most important things for relationship longevity. This is a level of care and consideration toward the long-term mental health and well-being of both partners that I rarely see given to fictionalized straight couples. So it makes me extra happy to see it modeled by a queer one. And just anecdotally, I want to say in recent years, I've noticed that the two genres most maligned for relationship toxicity seem to be making the greatest strides to progressively correct these wrongs. Those are both BL and Korean dramas. These days, a lot of the works in these categories are doing even better than their more mainstream counterparts. And if you've slept on them in recent years, I suggest making a return to more recent stories, because you might find something really exciting. Next, we have Tokyo Godfathers, which is a story about Hana, Gin, and Miyuki, three homeless people who discover a baby in a trash heap on Christmas. Hana, the tallest one, is a trans woman. Tokyo Godfathers actually accomplishes something miraculous. While the individual characters may commit acts of trans antagonism toward Hana, she always corrects them, and the movie itself always treats her with a great deal of respect. I should note that Yin, the character on the right in the largest image, calls her Okama, which is a slur, and she does end up in the end of the movie in the men's ward of the hospital. But the movie, again, is sure to give her the chance to complain about this error. It's a caper movie. So, like After Lost in Space, Hana's transness is irrelevant to the plot and the story. She just is. It's never revealed. There's never a scene where anyone uncovers her as a trans woman. The film makes some subversive moves to validate and humanize Hana in ways that trans women unfortunately often don't get as well. For example, Hana hates liars, subverting the common trope that trans folks are liars and deceivers. The assassin in the film is an actual man in a dress, whose existence contrasts against Hana's, further affirming that is not what she is. This dude puts on a wig and becomes an assassin. Hana puts on a wig and she becomes a Disney princess. Just look at she! Appreciate her, she's so glorious. And this movie is old by current anime standards. It came out in 2003. Things were a lot different for trans folks back when animation cells were still a thing. And if you allow me just one moment to air my own personal grievances from that time, Noriko deserved better. If only she could have been given at least the same sort of hero's treatment as Hana was afforded. Anyway, like I said, Hana is absolutely the hero of this tale. She's the one who gets to perform the big heroic deed at the end and saves the day. And I feel like that's worth celebrating for her. A large part of her storyline also asserts the importance of a chosen family, which is a pretty big deal for many real-life queers. Sometimes we can end up in some pretty crappy situations due to our identities, and chosen family in those times can be the ones who get us through and support us. That this movie really seems to get the queer importance of chosen family really warms my heart. Next, we have Wandering Sun, which is a classic manga and anime about the adolescence of Nitori Shu, a young trans girl, and Takatsugi Yoshino, a trans boy. Well, it's not without its problems. This manga and the accompanying anime are widely renowned for a good reason. The gentle art and delicate storytelling are true treasures, and if you're one of the people who hasn't given Wandering Son of You yet, I recommend bumping it up to the top of your backlog. The story has been written about really extensively online, though, so I want to take the time to talk about two pieces of the manga that I rarely see addressed. Part one is Anna. This is an Anna hate zone. She spends her entire relationship with Shu misgendering and invalidating her, and they end up together in the end. That made me so sad because she never actually changes or accepts the fact that trans people are real. And poor Shu, I guess, never realized that she deserved better treatment than this. All of these images on this slide, they're all from the last 2 volumes. Like here where she refers to Shu as an old man in women's clothes. Like, that's like yikes from me. Or here where in one of the last chapters, she responds to Shu telling her in a very direct way that she is trans by asking her if that makes her a lesbian. No, wrong answer. It's not always about you. I mean, maybe she might be a lesbian, but she sure seems to love heterosexuality and cisnormativity. She also might just be a straight cis girl who happens to like one girl in particular, because that's also a thing that happens sometimes. But I want to know why she couldn't explore her sexual feelings some other time, because in this moment, her girlfriend is trying to get her to finally hear her. And Anna is just like trying so hard to get that RuPaul energy, like, yeah, I love my trans friends. Inserting herself at every turn while remaining actively clueless about the experience that her trans girlfriend is going through at a pretty basic level. We live in a world where freaking Smash Mouth, can figure out the right flag to use and the right side to be on, but a world-famous gay man who has made a career out of monetizing queerness doesn't even know what the trans flag looks like. And as far as I know, Steve Harwell is a straight cis man, and the dude can't even handle some hecklers tossing bread at him, but the dweeb can do a better job out there than one of our biggest queer icons. Or Anna, because Anna sucks. Somebody once told me they didn't want to be he. I started using she, her instead. Listen, cis people who want to act in allyship with trans people, don't act like this, okay? Listen to your trans friends and loved ones when they put the trust in you to tell them about themselves. And for the love of Madoka, put in the very minimal amount of effort it takes to get people's pronouns right. Adam may be a trash boy, but he still respects people's pronouns, and so can you. The second order of business is Yoshino. And I want to give a spoiler warning and a content note before I start. I'm going to be talking about detransitioning in this section. So in the late chapters of the manga, Yoshino begins to detransition. And there are innumerable reasons why a person might detransition, which include things like health concerns, safety, loss of access, and comfort. Detransitioning alone does not mean that a person is or was not trans. Some people do test their identities and come to realize that they are, in fact, cis, but a large number of detransitioners do it for reasons unrelated to any change in gender identity. Yoshino begins questioning his gender identity and attempts to test against it in those late chapters by slowly reintroducing femininity into his public appearance, which is a choice that draws him an incredible amount of outside approval and attention. But the experience is not an uncomplicated one for him. For several chapters, his internal monologue is consumed with shaky wavering and doubt, and there are many panels devoted to him awkwardly observing and assessing himself with these more feminine presentations, much like this page here shown on the right. You can see just by the zoom in and shots, the details that it focus on how awkward he feels. But he continues to express thoughts and feelings representative of, at the very least, someone who is probably not a cisgender woman. He's embarrassed by the girly clothes he continues to wear. He wears to model. He laments that he doesn't want his breasts to grow. And then in the very last chapter, when Shu is finishing writing her story about the two of them, her voiceover says about Yoshino, one of them stopped wanting to be a boy, and that's all there is to it. Atop this absolutely gutting image of Yoshino dressed and presented femininely with tears streaming down his face. This image kills me to look at. This is a really complicated topic, and in Yoshino's case, he backtracked on his transition because living as himself was too difficult for him, because the outside world presented too many barriers for him to continue to live his truth. I would like the cisgender listeners to take some time to think seriously tonight about ways in which they can actively stop to help to remove these barriers for your trans comrades. And to the trans listeners on the stream, you are legitimate and good. I see you, and if you ever feel in need of validation from another human being, and you find yourself with no one better to turn to, all three members of the Skeleton Crew would be happy to provide with such services at the email shown on screen now. Send us an email. We would be happy to validate you. Okay. How many of you knew that all these classic characters were bi, or at the very least, non-monosexual? Because all of them totally are. Don't even get me started on the way that Shinji tucks in his shirt. He's only lucky that he wears slacks and not jeans, because you bet those things would be cuffed. For the purpose of this panel, I'm going to mostly use the term bi plus for the spectrum of non-monosexual identities. One of the things that I love most about being queer and very online is the way that we seem to be lightly magnetized to one another, which means my media feed ends up being full of gay nonsense like this, and I end up feeling extremely seen. This meme is kind of incredible and has a lot going on. Like, I saw it shared in bi spaces most, because I feel like the part about having not having a good relationship with the rest of the queer community especially resonated with many of us. Though I would like to point out, if some of us have a bad relationship with the community, then all of us have a bad relationship, because we're all in the same group. We're all the same community. This stuff, like me, goes both ways. Both ways in my case being people who are my gender and people who are not, which is another thing that I wanted to address. Bisexuality means different things to different people, but unfortunately some people have the misunderstanding that bisexuality is transphobic because they think it excludes trans people, which I have to admit is a little bit confusing to me, because trans men are men, trans women are women, and these two are full-time cuties. So even if a bi plus person only likes men and women, there are lots of those out there who are also trans. Okay. This is the last time I'm going to bring up Smash Mouth, I swear. But the fact that every single queer person on this green earth does not know that the guys who sang the hit single on the Shrek soundtrack have this very sweet and validating song about their bisexual girlfriend who's still in love with their ex is a fact I plan to rectify before I am faced to leave this flaming ball of carbon by hook or by crook. Observe its glory. But I mean, please consider my relative lack of a real substantive section on bi plus identities in anime to be my section on bi plus identities in anime in a meta sort of way. What I mean is, if you think it's difficult to find content that is in some way identifiably lesbian or gay, that problem suddenly becomes astronomically more difficult once you start heading further down the acronym. I struggled to find content about non-monosexual queer identities that was significant enough to write any sort of analysis on. Occasionally, these characters will appear, but either they or their bisexuality will take such a backseat on to other characters and plot lines that there wasn't really much for me to write about. I mean, even the Tumblr story that I have on this slide about Smash Mouth's queer girlfriend uses both the term lesbian romance and bisexual with regards to the same woman. It's totally fine and cool for two women in a relationship in which at least one of them is bi to call it a lesbian romance, if that's what they want to do. It's just that most bi women I've known would usually hear that as an erasure of their bisexuality. This kind of gets erased sometimes, but Sakura's relationship with Shaoran and Cardcaptor Sakura is still a queer one because the people within it are queer. I know it probably sounds silly to some of you, but this is a real problem for us. So often, bisexual people and characters have their sexuality ignored or rewritten, as if bi spies are presumed to be particularly indecisive or confused, or as if bi or even pansexuality were a rest stop on the way to one of the two true sexual identities, gay or straight. You'll notice that I don't generally use specific words for character identities in this panel because the limits of the character's sexual identities are often not explicitly stated or explored. This too is bi erasure because when the character is shown in one kind of relationship, we all can just kind of safely assume that that's the one type of relationship for them. And I don't need to make sure that the audience know sometimes that they might be bi. You can even this picture. They did the kind of, they did this famous beauty pose for the picture. It's very gay. Okay, so now we have Our Dreams at Dusk, which I love. Recent transfer student Takasu stumbles upon a remote lounge filled with and built by a group of people who occupy various points of the LGBTQIA spectrum. Takasu slowly moves to accept his own sexual identity as a young gay man. Meanwhile, the experiences and struggles of the other queer characters are explored through the story's progression, while they all help Takasu with his newfound identity and find community with other queers. Before I start, I want to note that there is a suicide content note for the beginning of this manga, but it is remarkable in that the mangaka themselves is both non-binary and asexual. That rules so hard. And I want to really emphasize this is very high on my personal queer manga recommendation list. It's out in English. It's only like 5 volumes. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend picking it up. So Our Dreams at Dusk does a lot of things right, but the thing I want to draw your attention to is the relationship that it has with education. On the right, we have a panel wherein someone, that's literally her name, is a character who's both asexual and aromantic, invites Takasu to project anything he'd like upon her. This corner was the greatest part of the panel in my mind, though, because she casually references an issue that ace people confront all the time. Allosexual people often assume that ace folks can't or don't or won't ever have sex. That just because they're ace, they have no reason to ever have sex or are sex repulsed, which in actuality, a lot of ace people have sex for a lot of different reasons. When she says, I can be an asexual person interested in sex or an asexual person not interested in sex, it kind of blows the whole thing wide open. It's not up for debate. She could just be either or. Both are equal possibilities. Then on the left, she explicitly reclaims her time and calls educating people on one's identities exactly what it is, emotional labor. Because people asking for explanations often forget this and end up extracting a whole lot from folks who are more vulnerable than them. It's work. Then there are these 2 panels which feature a heterosexual cisgender woman screaming at a poor unsuspecting trans man, all while dead naming him, by the way, about his apparent obligation to educate other cis people about how he's not gay, he's just trans. Setting aside for a moment the gross homophobia of her apparent belief that it to me is fine because he's just a boy, he's not gay. I love the way he gently but firmly resists, because it's not his job to make sure that straight cis folks understand the separation of queering gender and queering sexuality. And I want to use this opportunity to remind all of my LGBTQIA siblings out in the audience that we owe no one explanations for our identities. I know this probably sounds a little funny coming from me while I sit on the stream providing an education to an entire audience on queer topics, but all things considered, I am a person of relative privilege, which is a part of the reason why I've chosen to do this. And that's an important part that I want to make clear. Providing education is a choice that you can make. And a choice to abstain and conserve your energy and emotional labor is just as valid as the choice to teach. Okay, Sailor Moon. Why are these 2 so hot? Could somebody please explain why are they so hot? Before I start talking about Sailor Moon, though, I want to take a trip down memory lane with y'all to a time where Michelle whispered breathily about her hunky ex-boyfriend, Brad, while an extremely obvious silhouette of Haruka and Michiru kissing played on screen. And Amara rambled incoherently about how she manages her time. Lest you think I'm dwelling on an ancient problem that's no longer relevant, I'll remind us all of some more recent examples of translations de-gayifying characters. Like this first draft Crunchyroll snafu from Yuri on Ice, where they took a line that was originally not gendered and suspiciously applied a gender to it. By pure coincidence, the gender that they chose was also one that would imply heterosexuality upon characters wherein I assure you there was none. Or this scene from the first season of Dragon Maid, wherein the dub changed Kobayashi's line from "I'm a woman, though" to "I'm not into women or dragons," changing the implications entirely and effectively turning her eventual partner into a predator. Or like the kind of obtuse treatment Kaoru's intimate proclamation to Shinji got in the new Netflix release of Evangelion. Like, yes, ski and koi can literally be translated to like and grace, but I'd like you to ask yourself why someone would choose to put it that way, because they also can be translated as something more intimate, like love. In the lines before the top two screenshots, Kaoru was talking about human hearts, Shinji's in specific. Is that context not important? And then when placed all together, these lines translated in the new way can start to feel a little suspicious to me. Like, what purpose does this ambiguity serve? And more importantly, who is it for? In case of Kaoru, I think the point of the ambiguity wasn't to make you question whether he intended to say a queer thing or not. It was to question his motives, because he was the first being to offer Shinji compassion and affection that wasn't transactional, which I'm sure you can imagine is sometimes a thing for young queer kids. 2 years prior, we all collectively decided this penguin was in love with a piece of cardboard, and nobody batted an eye, but a male-coded alien space angel and a human boy. Now we're asking too much. Can you think of another example where a character said they ski someone, another person, and it didn't mean love? That's not really how it's used in anime in my experience. Should this anime have been called Say I Like You, Say I'm Worthy of Your Grace? That's doofy. But these two are cis and straight, so who's even thinking about subtlety with them? No one. They have the luxury of being direct. The very ordinary fact of them being in love alone is not enough to qualify their story as exciting. I'm just asking that people interrogate their biases. So I've got to break up my stress a little bit by shitposting before I get too sullen to finish this panel. So please enjoy these two very good tweets about the Netflix subtitles. Okay. Listen, I too would like to be Amara's cousin if it means that she's going to hold my hand and look at me like this. The Cloverway dub of Sailor Moon S is absolutely iconic because Sailor Moon was so gay, you can paper over its dialogue until you die, but the characters will still continue to be code big queer. It's no wonder virtually everyone who watched the original dub of this show eventually grew up to be super gay. The show actually only emphasized the gayness by removing the language, which honestly was never that direct to begin with. They only caused viewers to hyper-focus on it, and even more due to the weird dissonance. I mean, honestly, I kind of had to commend them in a way. Despite their best straightening efforts, we kind of ended up with something even more powerful gay energy in a way. And like, I gotta admire that talent. Even if I still wish this decades-old problem would finally leave us, nowadays we have new Uno reverse problems too, where phobes will do things like freak out over made-up bullshit like forced diversity. Like when Crunchyroll does something as mundane as not erase Hoshikawa Lily's identity as the perfect and adorable little trans girl that this precious little bean is. Protect! But we'll be okay. We've got her back, and we've also got Smash Mouth. I lied, I'm bringing up Smash Mouth again. adversaries may have evolved, like a Mr. Mime and a Don't Tread on Me snapback. Now, not only do we have Smash Mouth out there acting an accomplice with us, we've got plenty more of diverse and positive representation to look back on these days as well. We're at a point where even big mainstream shonen titles like My Hero Academia has multiple trans characters, and queer stories, especially in the manga sphere, have really started to boom in the West. We've come a long way, my little pocket monsters. And all this celebratory queerness kind of makes me sad that I also still have to talk about stuff like what happened in Sailor Moon or Mag Dragon because it remains relevant. I want to state clearly so no one will misunderstand. I don't believe that any of this was actually deliberately malicious. I honestly don't think that the people responsible even considered us enough in their decision making for it to be. And truly, that's what I find so hurtful when this sort of erasure happens. To continue to be treated like a fringe group, especially so passively, as if we aren't here and we aren't watching too, feels invalidating. It's awful. And if we're not, it's as if we're not even worth considering. Because look, we are here. I am most assuredly here with my big gay energy, and I'm probably crying. And you're here too, my beautiful queer family. And I want you to know that I see you. And what I would personally love more than just about anything would be if more of us got involved in the professional side of anime fandom. With more queer people working in positions like translation, script writing, voice acting, etc., it becomes less likely that mistakes like these will passively make it into final products. So if that's what you're into, I highly encourage you to get involved in the capitalist anime machine. I hope our time together has made you feel validated and maybe even given you a few more tools to call this BS out or a few more recommendations to watch. And I hope that you continue to do that with me as we disperse that into the world, because I do think that that's effective, however slow it may be. Please join me off to the future. And I just wanted to share my panel and cosplay group that I belong to has a few social media accounts shown on this slide. If you'd like to contact me later, especially if you want to cry about gay stuff, feel free to take a screen cap or photo of this slide if you like. I'll leave it for a few minutes.
That was an incredible panel.
Thank you so much. My final message is be gay, do crimes.
Oh, it's a good thing my mic was muted during that. I laughed so hard at some of your slides. It would have been very distracting.
I miss that. That's the thing I miss about in-person panels, is hearing everybody laugh and seeing the reactions that people have. I love that a lot. But I can kind of hear you a couple times, I think, a little bit.
Oh, yeah, there's probably a little bit of bleed in the mixer if I laughed loud enough. You've got a couple more minutes, so if you want to put your contact info back up.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody has any questions for you. I guess
I'm big dumb. I hope not.
I don't know. That was a really. I'm speechless as to how to even. It was just a very well crafted and very funny panel, and very informative.
I'm very happy to hear that. That's really what I'm aiming to do. You know.
Chaotic evil trash demon is asking if you have Instagram.
I do. If you contact me on one of these things here, I can give you. I don't post though, but I'll look at yours. I would love to. Hit me up on Discord. I'm in the lockdown Discord. I posted in the showing your badge thread already. So
nice.
Yeah.
Let's see. People are saying, "What a blast! That was so good. Loved it. Thank you. Thank you for the panel. That was delightful. Awesome panel." Somebody just posted. I don't know what these emotes are. It looks like it's a person with their arms up and then somebody with a heart emoji.
I love.
Somebody says...
You came to see me, I love you back.
They're writing a comic about a non-binary team going to their first anime convention. Teen, not team, sorry.
TEM?
I accidentally said team. I meant teen. Like teenager.
Like teenager?
Yes.
Oh, beautiful. Will that person tell me, hit me up with details about that? I'd love to.
Yeah, it's called Look Up Con Job. Oh, no, they're saying look up, as in look this up. Con Job Revenge of the Samurai Alchemist. Let's see. If you know the character, would you consider Tanya von, I don't know how to say this, Durogchaff trans, and why? I'm not sure what anime that's from.
Is that Tanya the Evil?
Oh, you know, it might be. Is that an anime about an isekai where their gender changes when they get in the other world?
Mm-hmm. I haven't seen it, so hesitant to really speak particularly on it, but it gets kind of funny when you're talking about like another world because I don't know, maybe the rules are different there, right? Like maybe it's not Earth, so
Sure.
Right. I've heard a lot about that anime. It seems pretty notorious. I'm interested. That person who asked that question, I'm interested in hearing what they have to say because they've clearly watched it. Do you feel Tanya is trans? Send me a message or say it in the chat. I would love to hear what you have to say.
We'll give them some time to catch up. I know you had a picture of Kino. I don't think you talked about Kino at length, but I really appreciated that. That's one of my favorite shows. Not to be that person, but the original, not the new one.
I'd definitely be that person about Kino, though.
The new one has some good parts, most of them being the sheep. But
trying to find it. So.
A Nerve Child says Make was reborn as girl. This must be another isekai. The chat loves the mention of the sheep. I don't know. Oh, Train Good Car Bad. I don't know what that's a reference to.
Is that a reference to the trains flag, maybe?
The trains.
I don't.
Is that something that RuPaul said? Was it like a mistyped tweet?
No, it was a tweet, but so he posted. So he ran into some controversy on Drag Race. I don't want to get into it, but
sure.
In order to, I guess, save a little face or like cover for himself, he made a tweet and saying, I love all my trans contestants, right? But he posted a flag that he clearly thought was the trans flag, but it was the flag for trains.
Oh,
so
no.
He just Googled like trans flag and typoed, and then just posted what he saw. So he clearly like just doesn't even know.
That's
it's very
unreal.
Painful. You can find the tweet. There's like, I'm sure it still exists because he has no shame, but there's screen caps of it all over the internet.
Let's see. Tebow has gotten back. In Tanya's case, it wasn't her choice. However, she adapted. In my opinion, she doesn't seem to care about gender beyond the practical advantage and disadvantage it could offer her in her position. Personally, I wouldn't consider her trans, or Tanya trans. However, I don't know much on this subject, which is why they wanted to hear your opinion. But I guess if you haven't seen the show, it's difficult to have one.
I appreciate your perspective, though. Maybe I'll watch it before I do my next panel.
Somebody said Tanya's gender is authoritarianism or authoritarian, because that's like it's about like somebody that gets isekai'd and becomes like anime Hitler, right? I don't really. I never watched it. It wasn't for me. Cool. Well, we're just about out of time. Someone says you're not wrong. I really appreciate you doing this. Of course, if you enjoyed this panel, all of the contact information is on screen. I'm gonna end the call and get ready for Evan to show up. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Cheers.